Just to introduce myself first, I'm Jane Tyrrell. I've been working with Human Givens for a long time now, actually 20 plus years, and have to admit to being Ivan Tyrrell's daughter, which is he's one of the co-founders of the Human Givens approach. So I've got a double interest there, but I believe passionately in all the work that he and Joe Griffin have done, which is why I work with the college. And alongside me this evening, we've got Dr. Gareth Hughes, who's the educational director of the college and the senior diploma tutor, along with Joe Baker, who is away teaching part 3 at the moment. And Gareth will no doubt introduce himself in a minute, but as well as being our educational director, he's a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy and lead author of University Mental Health Framework. So he's got a huge amount of knowledge and experience that he brings through to his training, and he's also a practicing psychotherapist and supervisor. So a massive amount of experience there. So we've still got more people coming through. It's lovely to see you. Hi, David from Wiltshire, Jennifer from Liverpool, Alex in Cheshire. Sorry if I don't call your names out, anybody. Hi, Anna from Amsterdam. Somebody else, Eve from Bath. Lovely to have you all here. As we've only got an hour this evening, I think we'll get started fairly quickly, get down to business. Great to see you all here. So somebody just come back from Australia. Wonderful. I know we're getting a lot of people coming through from overseas to do the diploma because they find it really resonates with them. I'm sure Gareth will touch on that in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to hand you over to Gareth Hughes, who's our senior diploma tutor, and he's going to take us through, give us a quick overview of the diploma, and then we're both going to answer any questions that you've got and the ones that we've had sent in to us already. So Gareth, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for being with us this evening on this beautiful sunny evening. It's very nice of you to give up your time, and hopefully this will prove profitable. Do put your questions into the chat, any questions that you've got as we go along or anything that you've come with already. If there's anything particularly personal to you, we'll maybe follow that up specifically with you later on. But the more general questions that might be useful to everyone, we'll try and pick up in the webinar today and get as many of those answered as we possibly can. And hopefully I'll answer some as I'm talking through the slides. Anyway, as Jen said, I'm a Human Givens psychotherapist and supervisor, and I'm qualified back in 2011, which feels like a long time ago now. Most of my work has been in the university sector, so I've been working with students and delivering therapy with students, but also conducting research and trying to work in ways in which within universities we can improve the support that we give to students and staff and to improve their mental health overall. But this evening, we're going to be talking about the Human Givens Diploma. And that qualification that I took back in 2011, and which has kind of then paved the way for me to kind of follow that career that I've had ever since. So if we go right back to the beginning, now hopefully you will have had a chance to watch the film you were sent, and if not, please do take time to watch it afterwards. But let's bring ourselves all the way back to the very beginning of this. And we're going to start today by thinking about the Human Givens organizing idea, and I'll just very briefly go through all of that. And then I'm going to talk about what that then brings to Human Givens therapy. So what the aim of Human Givens therapy is, the way in which we work, and how that relates to some of the other therapies, the other modalities that you may have heard about before all that. And then we'll pause for some questions. And then after all of that, we will come on and talk specifically about the diploma itself and what that requires. And then we'll give you the opportunity all the way through that to ask us questions, and so that you're hopefully getting your questions answered as we're going along. So we start this then by thinking about, a number of years ago, people like Ivan and Joe Griffin were kind of trying to work out, what is this therapy thing that we have, this counselling thing? There's all these different schools. There's hundreds of different schools of counselling and psychotherapy, lots and lots of different theories about mental health. A lot of them bring a lot of great stuff, but they don't necessarily always add up together. So what's actually going on here? Can we actually find something common? Can we find a real common understanding of what it is that leads to people being in mental distress and what it is we're trying to do in counselling and therapy? So they went all the way back to basics to think about, okay, well, what is this counselling therapy thing for? What is it trying to do? And well, essentially, when you look at the beginning of all schools of therapy, they start at that point of thinking about, well, there are some people who are in a level of distress that's beyond their ability to manage, that's impacting negatively on their day-to-day functioning and experience. And so counselling and therapy is there to help them overcome that so they can return to normal life and live a full life. So, okay, so who are these people who are in distress? What do we know about people? Well, people, human beings, are living things. That's one of the core things we know about, that we are all living things. And there is a key difference between living things and things that are not living. And that key difference is that living things require constant ongoing nutrition from their environment, from them to be able to thrive and grow and reproduce and flourish. And when living things aren't able to get that nutrition, they become distressed. And you can see that in all living things. You can see that in flowers and plants when they are not able to get the sunlight or the water or the nutrients that they need, they start to become distressed. And you can see that in the way that their leaves form or the way the flowers form. Now, obviously, as human beings, we're quite complex living things. We have a number of different kind of levels of needs. So obviously, we have physical needs. And we're growing to understand more and more that there is a real relationship between physical need and mental health, and potentially people feeling distressed. So we know that there's a relationship between food and mood, for example. We know that there's a relationship between movement and sunlight and mental health. Absolutely, there's a relationship between sleep. We can see very clearly that none of the diagnostic labels in any of the diagnostic and statistical manuals or the ICD fail to mention sleep somewhere. They've all got sleep related in them somewhere or other. So we can see that there are lots of physical needs that we have that impact on our mental health. But of course, there are needs that go beyond that for us. There are what we would think of as emotional needs, which are kind of psychological and social. So let's have a look at some of those needs and see if that makes sense to us. So to begin with, we have a need for safety and security. So we need to feel safe. If people don't feel safe, either because they're being bullied in the workplace or because home doesn't feel safe, then inevitably that impacts on our mental health. And that can impact more widely as well, of course. If people don't feel safe within the society where they are, within the culture where they are, then that can impact on them. We need a sense of autonomy and control. We need to be able to feel that we are in control of a certain amount of our life, that the decisions that we make are able to impact on our own lives, that we are able to control some of that, but also crucially, of course, that we're able to give up the control of those things that are beyond us, because we can't control everything in the universe. And if we try to, that can equally become distressing. And that's one of the key things that we come to straight away when we start talking about needs like this, which is that we need to be trying to meet them in a reasonably healthy balance. And that's different for each individual. But it's not about meeting any of these things perfectly. It's about finding the right balance for each individual person. We have a need for attention. We need to give attention to other people, and we need to receive it. And we can very much see that when people don't receive that level of attention, that can impact negatively. You see this in workplaces very often, when people feel like their work isn't noticed and it's not recognized, that can start to have a negative impact on how they feel. We absolutely as well, of course, having a need for emotional connection to other people. So we need to feel that there is someone else in our life, at least one other person who can understand us and accept us. And it can be difficult if we don't feel we have that in our lives at the moment. We might need to go out and build that and find that relationship so that we have that in our life as well. We have a need to be part of a wider community. We need to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. Really interestingly, all of this lines up not just to mental health, but if you actually look at lifelong studies of aging, studies where we look at what keeps people healthy all the way through their life course, which then results in them living longer and being healthier for longer. All of these things flow through too. So people who are more connected to community tend to be healthier for longer. So generally, one of the recommendations is if you want to live a little bit longer, volunteer. And it doesn't seem to matter if you're volunteering, at your local golf course or at allotment or for a local charity. As long as it's connecting you into community, it seems to have this beneficial health effect. We need a sense of status, which means not that we need to be on top of any kind of social tree that we're in, but we need to feel that what we bring is recognized, that it's valued, that we bring something to our community that has value and that value is recognized. We need to feel that we're good at something. We need to feel that we have some level of competence that we bring to the world and that we can be good at things. And that doesn't really seem to matter what it is. It might be about being good in your job or being a good parent or a good friend or good creatively. It doesn't really matter. We just need to feel that we are good at something in our lives. Conversely, talking about balance, we have all of those kind of social needs I talked about earlier on, but we also needed a chance to have space to ourselves. And we saw this a lot in COVID when people were in kind of close proximity and weren't able to get a break from each other in the same way, that actually that could have a negative impact. And that's where you saw lots of things appearing in newspapers about, how people on ships or in prisons or places where, privacy is more difficult to come by, actually would have very clear routines to kind of communicate to others that they were in their private space and therefore they weren't to be interrupted. And then finally, we have a need for meaning and purpose, which is one of the things that's probably most neglected in our society, is recognizing that actually we do need to have meaning and purpose in our lives. We have to have things in our lives that feel meaningful to us. And crucially, things that are meaningful to us give us some element of stretch. And again, you can acquire that in lots of ways. That can be about learning. Learning can be a very meaningful activity, learning more about the world and how it works and how other people work and how you work. That can be really valuable. You might also get it from faith or belief. You might get it from the relationships around you or from what you're giving back into community. So all of that can be really valuable and potential in kind of meeting that need for meaning. And again, as we say, we're not trying to do any of this perfectly. There isn't a perfect balance that we're aiming for. There's no moment where you reach that. It's kind of an ongoing thing. But what we're looking for is a reasonably healthy balance, which, as I say, is going to be different for each individual, because how we go about meeting those needs will depend on who we are as individuals. And it'll also depend on the culture and the society that we find ourselves in and the resources that we have around us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So this is our first kind of building block of the kind of Human Givens organized idea that human beings have these needs, these physical and emotional needs, and that to be healthy, we need to try and meet those in a reasonable balance. But when they aren't met in a reasonable balance, we can then become distressed. So I guess that one of the questions that arises from this is, well, why is it that sometimes we aren't able to meet those needs? No, as I say, I spend a lot of time in the research literature around mental health, and there are lots of arguments and debates which you may see in the mental health world about whether it's, mental health is a physical, or whether it's social and environmental, or whether it's trauma, or whether this is about deficit within the individual themselves, all of this kind of stuff that plays out. But actually, all of the things that we know can contribute to people being unwell actually really boil down to one of three things. So to begin with, it might be that the environment itself is sick. So if we think about back to COVID as well, sometimes it might be about the resources that people need to get their needs met aren't available. So people who were living on their own, who weren't able to go and access wider community, obviously those needs were being impacted on negatively. But again, it might be that, the environment is toxic in some way. Perhaps, as I say, if you're in a workplace where you're being bullied, that might impact on your need for safety and security, or might impact on your need for control. It might be that, again, if you're living in a relationship or in a household where there's violence, that again can impact on it, because it can prevent you getting some of those needs met. So the environment is the first thing that may act as a barrier. The second thing is what we would call disruption to the guidance system. So if we think about the fact that we come out with a system that has evolved to allow us to go about getting our needs met, we come out with a set of resources and a kind of an instinctive knowing that we need these needs to be met, and we start moving towards that. And again, that's true of all living things. You can see that flowers turn towards the sun in order to get the sunlight that we need. But that internal guidance system can be disrupted by a number of things. So it might be about things like genetic development. There's some genetic conditions that can disrupt that. It might be about, an accident, for instance, a head injury, for instance, which may make it more difficult for somebody to get their needs met. But the things that we're most likely to see in counselling and therapy are that it might be to do with trauma, the trauma that someone has experienced, and that can present in a range of ways and can be caused in a range of ways. Or it might be about conditioning, the way people have been brought up to think or to behave, which then acts as a barrier. So, if someone's brought up to think that you can't trust anyone else, everyone's out for their own end, they're all going to do you over in the end. Well, it's very difficult to build emotionally intimate relationships that require trust if you don't think you can trust anyone else. So it could be around conditioning as well. So that's our second thing, that disruption to the guidance system. And then finally, it might simply be that someone is missing some skills, that they have resources that they've not learned how to use, or they've not yet been able to develop the resources that they need to get those needs met. And this can play out in a number of different ways. So one of the things we see a lot with young people at the moment, in a lot of the work that I do, is young people who are missing some social skills, who are unable, for instance, to walk into a room where they've never met anyone before and introduce themselves and start a conversation. They haven't developed that skill yet. So actually helping people to develop those skills sometimes can be the missing link between them being able to meet their needs and not. And so essentially, when we're talking about, why is it that people aren't unable to get their needs met, it breaks down into one of these things. And therefore, we can more or less always see that whatever the cause might be for somebody becoming unwell, it's going to fall into one of these three things, or it's going to be a combination of one or more of those three things. Because sometimes you might end up working with somebody, or you might see somebody or know somebody where actually it's all three of these things coming together. So The other question that arises from all of this is, well, this is what happens when things go wrong, but what about when things go right? Because we need to pay attention to that too, because if we're going to help people actually flourish and meet their needs and live a healthy life, we need to understand how that works too. So the other aspect of that is about our resources, because as living creatures, we also come into the world with a set of resources, and then hopefully we will also have the opportunity to develop resources in our life. So we have, first of all, what we would think of as innate resources. So those innate resources include things like long-term memory. So we have the ability to remember things, which means we can learn, we can develop skills, we can learn from previous occasions when we've encountered similar problems and bring those solutions with us. So that long-term memory allows us to build up a store of solutions and a store of skills and knowledge and understanding and wisdom that we can then use to get our needs met. We also, alongside that, and actually connected to that, we have imagination. And our imagination allows us to come up with new solutions. It allows us to come up with ideas for ways in which we could get our needs met better in the future, both for ourselves and for our communities and for the wider society. And, if you think about it, it's incredible the fact that we can use our imagination to come up with things that no one's ever thought of before. I mean, that's a thing that, most other animals, as far as we know, don't have. So it's an incredibly powerful resource. One of the other things to know about our resources, of course, though, is that sometimes if we haven't learned to use them, if we haven't developed the skill to use them healthily, they can get hijacked on us. And sometimes the thing that's going wrong, that disruption to the guidance system, might be about the fact that actually the resource is working in a way which actually is unhelpful to us. So very often people who are experiencing high levels of anxiety will be making great use of their imagination to imagine all kinds of horrible things that may never happen and probably never will happen, but which continue to make them anxious in the moment nevertheless. So sometimes it's about helping people develop the ability to use those resources in a healthy way. We also have a great ability to understand the world through metaphor and through pattern. We call this pattern matching. And if you think about your daily routine and your habits, a lot of those things you'll be doing without having to think about, because you've got a pattern there that just allows you to do it. When you walk into a new room and you see chairs, you'll know that they're chairs without having to work it out. You don't have to think about it and look at them and do an analysis to work out what it is. You've got a rough metaphorical pattern of what chairs look like. And even though chairs look very different in different places, you'll still know it's a chair and that you can sit down in it. So we have these pattern matches that we take with us. And again, they could be really helpful because we can learn about things that may be a risk to us. And those patterns will help then to keep us safe. But again, if the pattern matching goes slightly wrong, we might sometimes start pattern matching to things that aren't actually risky, but our brain's telling us that they are. And then we become anxious and we become overly aroused as a result of all of that. So again, one of those examples where a resource can be really helpful to us, but we have to be careful sometimes. And sometimes in therapy, we have to be aware of how that can sometimes go wrong. We have what's called an observing self. And this means that we're able to step outside our current circumstance and take in that big, wider environment. We can understand the bigger context and therefore make better decisions rather than just getting caught up in the moment. We've got an ability to build relationships with other people. We can build rapport very quickly. When people are allowed to, and they're allowed to, they develop those skills, we have an ability to empathize and understand other people and connect with other people very quickly. We have a rational mind that allows us to check out our emotional responses and really think those through. But we also have those emotions and instincts, which a lot of the time can be a really quick, good guide to help us make decisions and to guide us back to good behavior. If we spend time with other people, or you do an activity that you really enjoy, that's really good for you, or you go and you exercise and you feel really good about it afterwards, all of that then encourages you to re-engage and go back and do those things that are getting your needs met. And then finally, we have a brain that dreams and that allows us to discharge the kind of emotional arousal that we've built up over the course of the day that we haven't been able to naturally act out during the day. And that then allows us to wake up feeling refreshed the next day and not carrying the emotions. And that's why most languages have a phrase that means sleep on it, because we know that when we go to bed and sleep and then wake up the next day, it doesn't feel as bad because our brain has been able to discharge that through dreaming. So this then is our basic organizing idea in Human Givens. Human beings come into the world with a set of needs. If we can meet those needs in a reasonably healthy balance, then we will flourish and feel good and be able to live healthy lives. We have resources that help us meet that. And then in addition to that, we can develop life resources. And almost anything can be a resource. The people in our lives, the faith that you have, the skills that you build up, the work that you do, all of those things can then be used to help you get your needs met. But sometimes this goes wrong because one of those three barriers gets in the way. So how this then feeds through into therapy is that our role as a therapist or as a counselor is essentially to help people use the resources they have, develop the resources that they have to overcome the barriers in their life to meet their needs in a healthy balance. And the way we do that in therapy is we work very pragmatically in Human Givens. So the Human Givens therapy model is a holistic model. As you can see, we look at all aspects of human life. It's integrative. We draw from lots of other therapies and lots of other sources of wisdom, and we integrate it all together into a very practical, pragmatic way of working that focuses on the resources and strengths that the client brings with them. So it's a strengths-based model as well, to help them overcome whatever problems they are facing in their life right now. And depending on what those barriers are, we may need to work in different ways. And we draw, as I say, on lots of other modalities. We draw, we bring in stuff from person-centered, from solution-focused, from CBT, from motivational interviewing. We basically, when I particularly went out and looked for all of the parts where we could see there was a really good evidence base. And then we integrate them into a model that uses this organizing idea to focus our work so that we have a clear purpose and focus on our work, drawing in all of the other evidence-based practice that we can that fits into that model. And then we focus that in on the individual who comes into the room. So we work really hard then to work with the model of reality, the experience, the resource, everything that the individual client is bringing to shape the therapy around them so that they're able to get their needs met in the balance that's right for them in their life with the resources that they have. And so that's what we then set about training people to do within the diploma. But I realize that's a lot we've covered very quickly. Hopefully you've been able to have a look at some of this already, but I will just pause in case there are any questions on all of that before we go any further.
That was brilliant, Gareth. Thank you very much for that. There are a few questions. I don't think there are any as yet on what you've just covered. So I don't know if anybody has a question about the Human Givens approach, everything that Gareth has just summarised there that you might want to put into the chat now. If not, we can use this opportunity to go through some of the questions that we had sent through in advance, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, of course.
James is saying, are we getting a recording of this afterwards? Yes, you are. And we've had a lot of people sign up who aren't able to come tonight. And I think it's because they know they're getting a recording. So everybody will get a copy of that, yes. Anybody else got anything on? It was quite a tour de force, that, Gareth. So it's obviously stupefied everybody, or hopefully, a lot of people.
Hopefully clarified a few things.
Yeah, hopefully clarified a lot. Can other modalities include sound therapy, hypnotherapy? I'm not quite sure, Alex, what that means.
I can pick that up, Jen. So what we've done within the model is we've very carefully worked to bring it together in a way that works in a cohesive fashion. So it's really important that when we're doing all of that, that all of that lines up and makes sense, and that the way we're bringing that together makes sense in one thing. So absolutely, we use trance work in Human Givens. We do bring in some of that, but not the whole model, because it's we've got to be really careful about how we put all of that together. So it's not overwhelming for a client if you're trying to put everything together. But also there's an ethical thing there, and that people are coming for Human Givens therapy. They have to know they're getting that and not getting lots of other stuff as well. So but you can look at more of that when you if you're interested. If you have a look on the part 1 stuff, you'll see some of the stuff that we include in all of that.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant, Gareth. I can see slightly different tangent. Gina is just asking, she's looking to start the diploma and lives in London end of this year, next year, but you're also seeking to go to the USA. Can you continue the course online? The second parts and third parts of the course really are in person. So it's more the beginning parts that are actually online, Gina. So it's not ideal, but it is. We've got fast track sort of blocks of courses, so people can, if they've got the time and finances, can sort of go through part 1 fairly speedily to get on to part 2. Hopefully you might be able to do part 2 in 2006, and possibly we've got a lot of people who do actually fly over. Gareth just finished a part 2 with about 6 different students from 6 different countries, as well as all the others from the UK. So we have a lot of people who do fly over. I know that's not within everybody's means. But Gina, if you wanted to contact, say, Fiona Heffernan, who is our student sort of registrar and support lady in the office, she can talk to you in more detail about what your needs are, and she's happy to chat to anybody about their individual diploma journey, how they see working through. I've got one. Sorry, Gareth.
Important. Yeah, I'll just pick up this because that's also Leon's put this through as well. It's important to just emphasize that we do some of it online, where it's more instructional. But there is obviously, when training to be a therapist, a lot of it is about developing skill. And so we have a lot of our in-person days needs to be in person, because we need you to develop to get used to working with people, to develop to be getting used to using the skills that we're teaching you with people in face-to-face situations, because you need to develop that. And even if you want to work online later on, you really need to develop the skills in person and then develop online, because online there's a whole different set of challenges to working with people online as well. So that's why we do quite so much of it in person, and it's the same with all the other counselling and therapy training that you'll see that the other registers provide as well, and including in the NHS psychological professions, like psychology, for instance. There just needs to be a portion of it that's in person so that you can develop that skill. And so you'll find when you come on those in-person days, there's a lot of practice. It's not just sitting listening to people all day.
Yeah, absolutely. And the online components of, I think they're very much giving you a lot of information. They talk about techniques and so forth, but the skills practices in the in-person courses. So you get a lot of background information and resources and so forth on the onlines, but you do need, as Gareth says, to put them into real practice. It's all about, a lot of it is very subtle and nuanced very often, isn't it? Especially language skills. So
yeah.
I've got another, if I just go through here, we've got Leon coming in. We can, payment plans, we've got various things. You're through our website, you're able to pay for things in installments with PayPal, three payments for workshops and online courses and so forth. And we do, everything has to be paid for before it's attended. But we do, even with part 2 and part 3, if we talk to our finance lady, Linda, we sometimes set up for people, they pay in installments before they attend. So we can do things like that for you. We don't have any bursaries or anything at the moment, but we are looking into this with the Human Givens Foundation, who are looking at sourcing grants to be able to, it's not immediate, but we're hoping to go that direction in the future. Darren, we've got started study part 1. Currently got no formal counselling business or training. Love to enroll in going into part 2, start building counselling business. Right, it's all going, sorry, all the questions are moving up there. So basically, I think that's talking about setting up in private practice after part 2. But really, I don't know if you want to talk about that, Gareth, because really,
shall I think probably if I explain the next bit, the diploma bit, and then that might answer some of the questions, then we can go back and pick up this later on. So
can I just touch on Fred's one just there before that, because before you move on, but we are going back to Leeds next year. I know that's not the same as Scotland. We have previously had our training up in the north. He's talking about most of the things. Our venues are in Bristol and London at the moment, but we are going back to Leeds, and we have to, if we've got the interest there, we would go back to Scotland. We have done some workshops in Scotland in the past, but in COVID and everything, when everything moved online, things changed. So watch that space, Fred. We will be going back to Leeds.
All right. Well, let's just have a bit of a look at the diploma itself then. So so the diploma then trains you to become a human givens therapist and to work in the way that I just talked about. Now, we designed the diploma very deliberately to be as flexible and as accessible as possible. So we really do our best to try and make it fit as people's lives as much as we can. So the way this works, well, I'll talk a little bit through that in a moment, but it's important, first of all, to acknowledge practicing as a qualified therapist is after part 3. And that's the point at which you're fully qualified. But once you've done that, then you can join the professional register as a practitioner. And that register is recognized by the Professional Standards Authority in the UK. And it's also recognized within what's called the Scope framework, which is kind of the national framework for counselling and psychotherapy training. We're one of the partners that created that. And so the Human Givens training is part of that, alongside BACP, UKCP, BPS, NCPS, and SEC. I've remembered them all. Hurrah. So those are the kind of other main registers you should think, the kind of professional registers that counsellors and psychotherapists are a part of. So the way this works basically is part 1, we leave that as flexible as we possibly can. So the speed at which you can work through that really depends on your own circumstances. So there are 8 online courses for you to complete. and then 10 in-person workshops. There's a reading list to go with all of that. And of course, we will do a lot of skills practice on the days itself. Important to say at this point, you are still learning. For many of you, you may be starting this completely new. You might never have done anything like this before, which is absolutely fine. We get lots of people doing that. So the skills practice that you'll be wanting to do at that point in the build it part 2 will be quite small. It'll be, little bits of language practice, practicing telling stories to people. That's always a good one to practice, things like that. So you won't, be moving to try and do full therapy sessions with people at this point, because, you'll be in your early stages of training. We run those workshops, as Jen said, at the moment in Bristol and London, and that will be in Leeds again next year. We have a recommended order to take those in, but there's flexibility in that as well. So we know that sometimes people have to move that around depending on where they are and what's going on in their life. So you can take a little bit of time to build up those courses, and sometimes people do. I would say try not to rush them and do them too quickly, because you do also need an opportunity to absorb the learning and take all of that in. But you can, as Jane said, do a number of days in a block at a time, and that works quite well for some people. Once you've done all of those courses, you can then come on to the part 2. Part 2 is where we really deepen your learning, where we really bring it all together and help you to make it all connect, and really start then to embed it into skills practice. There's a lot of skills practice in part 2. Part 2 is run as 2 weeks. So there are 2 weeks they run in Bristol. You do week 1, then you go away for 4 or 5 weeks just to let all that learning embed, and then you come back for the second week. And then at the end of that week, we have an exam. Do not worry about the exam. Don't let that pull you off. We work really hard to make sure you're prepared, and do lots of revision practice to make sure you're there with it. We spend a lot of time during the course of that 2 weeks really embedding the knowledge so that it, what we call, gets into your bones. You really grasp it and understand it, and so that it goes into your skills, and you do a lot of practice with each other, so that by the end of part 2, once you pass your exam, you're ready to start working with the public as a trainee. And at that point, then, working towards part 3, you can work with what we think of as mild to moderate. So mild to moderate depression, anxiety, phobias, smaller presentations that are, appropriate to the level of competency you will have at that moment in time. And at that point, you'll also start working with one of our supervising tutors. So supervising tutors are people who are qualified clinical supervisors who have also been trained to kind of teach and coach our trainees, so that you're getting both things in one go, really. You're getting that supervision, but you're also getting that support to develop your skills and to develop your therapeutic practice. When you're ready and you've worked with enough clients, and that varies again by person. Again, we build in flexibility all the way through this. You can go on to part 3. So there isn't a set moment where you go on to part 3 because you've done a certain amount, or a certain amount of time has necessarily passed. What we say is you go when you're ready, and that will be your supervisor who will assess that. And they will do that on the basis of the way in which you're able to talk about the clients you work with. And they will ask you to bring some recordings of therapy sessions, which you'll do with your client's permission. And we also ask you to use outcome measurement as much as possible as well, so that they can see that your clients are getting better in the main. And then when you're ready, you can move on to part 3. Part 3 is 1 complete week. We do a number of assessments during the course of that week. You'll do 2 therapy sessions cold, so you won't know what you're going to be working with until you start working with it. You also do a Viva that week as well. And then after the week's over, you'll write a reflective personal development plan, which will reflect on your strengths and weaknesses, what you've learned, how you've developed, and what development I think you need over the course of the next 12 months, and how you're going to go about doing that. And then once you pass all of those assessments, you can then sign up and register as a HGI member and begin practicing in your career. So that's the kind of the quick span through all of that. There's a lot of learning in all of that, and you will, it will, your mind will expand, your skills will expand, and we get very good feedback from our students about the quality of the learning that they get through that whole journey. And I'm very confident, because I do some of the part 3s, and I see our students doing those final assessments and doing those final pieces of therapy, and I'm very confident that our therapists, I would happily stand any of our new graduates against very experienced therapists who have had other training. So as I say, part 1 is the 8 online courses, the 10 in-person workshops, the reading list, and some skills practice. You have to do all of that before you can come on part 2. Then part 2, we will send you out the diploma manual well in advance of you coming along. We do ask you to read it at least once. You'll benefit from reading it more than once if you can. You've got the 2 weeks then on part 2, followed by the exam. And then you can move on to start working with the public as a trainee. And then once you've worked with your supervisor as a trainee and you've built up that practice and you're ready, you can then move and do the part 3 final week. And once you qualify, you can then apply to join the HGI register, which is accredited in the UK by the PSA. So the things you gain, you get a lot of psychological knowledge. It's really important to say when in our teaching, we draw together on a lot of different fields and a lot of different disciplines. So we do draw on therapy, we do draw on psychological studies. We will, be talking to you about, recent research. We look at health research as well. We also look at education, anthropology. We look at what other cultures bring and how other cultures think about and understand mental health as well. So you get quite a broad understanding of psychological knowledge. You will really have a way of thinking about people and the world and yourself to understand what it is that people actually need to thrive, so that we're not just working in therapy and trying to get rid of the negative. What we're actually trying to do is to help people live lives that are really good and healthy for them. We will help you develop effective therapeutic skills and techniques and a range of interventions to help people depending on what they're presenting. And an ability to work with a wide range of difficulties and a wide range of people. We spend a lot of time talking about how to shape therapy to individuals who are coming into practice who maybe have very different experiences from you, maybe very different worldviews from you, and being able to still find ways of working with them. Absolutely, there's a lot of focus on the language skills you use. You will get some personal insights along the way. I think that's true of any counselling or therapy training, that you come to realizations about yourself, which can help you then meet your needs in a better balance. If you are already in roles where you're supporting other people, you might find that increases your effectiveness. But actually, you may find it in roles which have got nothing to do with therapy whatsoever. We find people who are maybe teachers or, managing teams in business or whatever. The knowledge and understanding they get from this actually informs all of that practice as well. So recently on one of our part 2s, one of our students is somebody who works on building sites. And he said this has changed the way he manages those building sites. And it has had a really positive effect on all of that. You will then, at the end of all of that, obviously, as well, have an opportunity to develop your own private practice. And I would say that, certainly the students that we've had come through, the first 18 months is hard work setting up a business, as it is in any business. But those who really put in that hard work in the first 18 months, by 18 months, 2 years, certainly most of my supervisees were having to have conversations about how they manage the fact that they now have more demand than they can manage and how they can refer some people on because they can't take on all the clients who want to come and see them. It gives you career flexibility. You never know where this is going to go. I mean, I would never have expected back in 2011 that I would have doctor in front of my name, that I'd be a principal fellow, that I'd be doing research. That wasn't the plan. But all of that opened up because of the training that I did. And so you never quite know. And we've got people who are doing all kinds of things that they would never have expected as a result of the training that they did. And obviously, it's professional accreditation with a recognized register that is accredited by the PSA. So this is just a little capture of all that diploma journey that I've just talked about, and you can find all of this on the website. And Jane has popped in the chat a PDF of the workshop planner that you can use to help you plan your journey through the diploma overall. So important, I just want to come back and just mention that scope framework earlier on. The scope framework has 3 columns, and this recognizes the fact that many of the other registers have had kind of 3 types of membership for a very long time. So BSCP, for instance, have had registered members, accredited members, and senior accredited members. BSCP is, for those of you who aren't from the UK, is the largest counselling and therapy register in the UK. So it's the one people tend to look at and refer to. So with the scope framework coming into place, which is that way of making sure that there are minimum standards that all counsellors and therapists are being trained to, we've developed new membership categories as well that align then with BSCP, and they're recognised by those other accrediting registers as being equivalent. So when you pass the part 3, you go into what's called column A of scope. When you've then developed your practice, when you've got 450 hours of practice and you've done some more ongoing development and training, which includes the diploma, but there'll be more training on top of that because you need to keep up your CPD every year, then you can apply to become an accredited member of the HGI, which is the equivalent to accredited member of BSCP. And then when you've built your practice up more again and you've done more training, you can then apply for column C if you wish to. There's no real need to. Not everyone needs to go into column C. Column B is the one that most people are going to be looking for. But that then will have equivalence to all of those other registers. So I will pause there because I'm aware, again, I've been talking for a while and I can see that there are questions rattling into the chat. So we'll pause to try and take those.
Gareth, you've done a brilliant job of super breakneck speed, covering a lot of ground, and we've been having quite a few questions come through. And Libby, I can see we have got your questions from earlier on. I will get back to those. If I can just go back, we just had one here from Lisa saying, can Human Givens practitioners, are they able to work with children as well as adults? And I know certainly the Human Givens approach can, but I think they need possibly additional qualifications. Is that right, Gareth?
Yeah. So what we would say is we're in the diploma, we are training you very much to be able to work with the kind of the common presentations with an adult group. Now, if you've already working with children, if you've already been used to working with children in a therapeutic way, then adapting that's really straightforward and really easy. If you have never worked with children before, then yes, we would ask that you really need to go and do some additional training, because there are a whole range of things like safeguarding issues and ways in which you need to adapt your work to work with children. But we do provide some courses on that post qualification. But I think if you've never worked with children before, particularly in this kind of environment, it's worth you just going and working with adults to get your skills down, to get your techniques down, to just get used to working. And then think of expanding into all of that, because again, there's an additional level of complexity and challenge when you're working with children and young people. But absolutely, we've got lots of people, lots of practitioners who do absolutely that, that's their full-time work. We've got people who work in schools. I think one of my supervisees who's working permanently in a school now, who qualified about 3 years ago. So absolutely, it is a viable career route, but we would say that if you've never done this before, work with adults first and then move on and do some more training.
We've had a lot of people come through who from lots of different disciplines, but say from working with children in schools, support workers, all sorts of things, who take the Human Givens Diploma to then add on to the skills they've got, speech and language therapists, people like that, who can then use this training to help with the emotional difficulties that they come across in their work with children and young people. So it's a very flexible course. I wonder if I can just go back through. We've got Elaine here who's been asking questions about the timing of things. And I know she looks at the fast track thing that I put on there. You can do, as Gareth says, you can do the part one workshops quite quickly the way they're planned throughout the year, and you can go and do blocks. The reason we do that is to help people on costs, traveling to do several workshops at a time, particularly those flying in. But as Gareth said, it is good. It depends on what your previous experience is, really, how long you would need to go through the diploma, how long you might need to assimilate the new knowledge, practice the skills and so forth. So people can do part one at varying speeds depending on what's going on for them and what their previous experience is. But I think also, Elaine, part of your question was, is there a time limit between? And I think we ideally would say to people, take it can be as quick as 4 months, or up to usually about 2 years to work through part two would be a maximum, really, because you need to keep on top of the learning, keep it fresh. But I know there is definitely a set thing between part two and part three of 2 years. You need to have done part three 2 years after you've done part two, for the same kind of reason, to keep sure your learning is fresh and you're using your skills and so forth. But it really does depend. The time frame depends very much on the individual, what your previous experience is, how well you get on, how easy you find the work, whether you want more practice yourself. So it is very flexible, and we've deliberately designed the diploma to be like that, because we know a lot of you will be doing the training around your existing already busy lives. So we make it as flexible as possible. There is home study, there's reading, there's a diploma manual which was touched on the film. But it's not onerous. It looks a bit daunting when it comes through the post. It's quite a big manual, but it's again designed in a way that you can stop and start and take in, and it gives you an awful lot of really useful information before you go to part two. There's a couple more if I can go through. There was one about age limit. There's no age limit to doing the diploma. And Libby, I know you're keen to have your questions. You're concerned about practicing part one, what you learn on the part one online, and practicing the skills if you haven't got access to too many people. I don't know, Gareth, if you're able to talk about that.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, bear in mind that the part one practices will just be will be little bits of skill practice. So there are usually opportunities for doing that. It's really when you get kind of coming towards part two that kicks in a little bit more.
Yeah.
That said, we've had some students work in really creative ways to give them the opportunity to get that practice in. So if we think about something like we use something called a rewind technique to help people overcome PTSD and phobias. I've had students and supervisees who have done a lot of those on their dogs, because if you talk to your dog, the dog will keep looking at you, and have also done things on things like inanimate objects. Like I had one supervisee who did a lot on with a teddy bear, because it just got her used to saying it and doing it and working it through, and actually that worked really effectively for her. So there are all kinds of creative ways in which you can work with some of this, but it might also be that as you work your way through the diploma, it opens up other opportunities for you to widen your social circle and whatnot as well. So sometimes students practice with each other, sometimes students have WhatsApp groups and they can't stay in contact. And I know on my last part two, the students on the part two were in contact with each other and supporting each other's learning and practicing with each other quite a bit. So there's that opportunity as well. So things change along the course when you're doing the diploma as well. So you might find that too.
Yeah, it's a very supportive environment, we find, isn't it? We often, students tell us that they've made firm friends for life, and not that that's the point of doing the diploma course, but it is, you find that you'll meet people on the part one workshops and you'll see them again at another one and get chatting, and it's a very great way to meet new people and similar like-minded professionals and so forth. So there's a lot of support there, and also post qualification, past part two, there are Human Givens peer groups that you can join. The ones for trainees have got a supervisor on board as well, and then past part three as well, there are even more specialist interest sort of groups that you can join. So there's lots of peer support there and communication.
And I just apologize to David's just quite rightly asked me about what Adviva is, and he's absolutely right, because I mentioned Adviva and then I didn't explain what it was, so apologies for that. So Adviva is a kind of oral assessment. So what we ask you to do, the assessment is, I mean, we can be upfront about this because we're very public about what the assessment is. We ask you to come in and just give us a quick, like 5 minute chat about how you think the Human Givens organizing idea could be used in some part of society or life that isn't therapy. So how could you apply that organizing idea that I talked about earlier on? How could you apply that to something else, to somewhere else? And then following you kind of just talking through what your idea is, there's then a one-to-one conversation with the tutor, which usually lasts about 20 to 25 minutes, where we just tease that apart and talk about it and have a conversation about it. And it's just a way for us to assess that you actually understand the organizing idea and the depth of it and how much it can be applied to other things. So that's what the Adviva is. It's not, you don't need to prepare slides or anything like that. But we'll talk you through all of that as you come through the diploma. You don't need to be worrying about that at this stage. And your supervisor will make sure that you're prepared and ready to deliver that. But you're quite right to check what it is.
Right, I'm just going through. Are all the books and reading materials supplied with the course in all parts? They are additional. They're additional. They're not included in the course fee, if that's the question. But there are course notes with the part ones and the onlines, and then the diploma manual comes when you book onto when you've paid for part two. I think you get that sent through.
Yeah.
And Karen here is asking, does any of this training hit on coping with the autistic spectrum, children or adults?
Yeah, it does, because we'll talk about working with the diversity of the population and the kind of the range of challenges that come in. So within the diploma, that's kind of filtered through. We talk about it in lots of the different courses and in lots of aspects of part two when we're talking about that. I would say as well that generally that we're in the course at the moment of developing new training around exactly this topic, which would be kind of a CPD course that you could then go and do as well, which would be in much more depth. But absolutely, we talk about it because it's a key part of practice, being able to work with people who may be neurodiverse in some way.
Absolutely. I'm going to scan back. There was also another question about from Yolanda about, is there any international recognition for this diploma. So she's saying if she completes part 3 and subsequently moves abroad, can she use it outside the UK? I mean, it's a complicated one. She's talking about Australia. We have got therapists out in Australia and somebody training at the moment from New Zealand who's going to practice out there. And we've got therapists in a lot of different countries. But the problem is that the rules are different in every single country, aren't they, Gareth? I know
they are, and that is what makes it complicated and difficult for us to answer that question. In some places, yes. And as Jane rightly says, we've got people working in countries all over the world at the moment using the Human Givens approach, and working as Human Givens therapists. But there are some countries who have got really rigid rules around all of that, and so it just really depends on where you are, and how all of that stacks up, really.
Yeah, so it would be a question of doing a little bit of research probably, and perhaps even contacting people overseas. I know other people have done that who are working. So but we are ever increasing numbers of people abroad. I don't know if we've got time. I'm very conscious that we're nearly at the end, but there are questions that were sent in earlier, if I can just before tonight, so I'll just go through a couple of those. There's somebody who wants to do the courses for their own self-development, which we've had a few number of people want to do this out of interest, which is a very valid reason for doing it. So wondering about the time commitment, and again, we're very flexible, so that would be very much up to you. It would depend. A lot of people decide they stop after part 2 if they've done it for themselves or to augment the skills and training they've already got, and they don't particularly want to be a therapist. They wouldn't go on and do part 2, so there would be no sort of time constraint after part 2 if that was what you were doing. This course, a lot of people are asking about the course cost, but hopefully we'll get onto that in a minute, and where it's held. At the moment, the training is in Bristol and London, and the part 2s and part 3s are in Bristol at the moment. And as I say, we're coming part 1 workshops are going to come back to Leeds. Somebody here, Sue, said she took courses quite a few years ago and then moved abroad and didn't practice. Would we recommend retaking, starting from scratch again? That really depends how long ago that was, I think. If you've taken a course within 5 years, you can repeat the course at half price. We do that because we know some people, sometimes life gets in the way. And we find also other people, if they want to redo a course that just for their own learning to practice again, we enable them to do that as well. Josephine was asking, is there a recommended order to do the part 1 courses in? There's not really, but we do think Gareth's 2-day workshop, which is actually running in London next week, the therapeutic power of language, is a really good one to start with. And the stories one is also on next week. There's a similar one, or guided imagery. I think it's really good to go along and meet Gareth, meet some of the other students who are on the diploma journey. And it gives you really good foundational skills, language skills, that are applicable even if you don't go on to do the diploma. You can use them in any kind of work, can't you, Gareth, and just everyday life, actually. I am whizzing through these. I'm sorry about this. Somebody else here, Graham, has said there's a lot of demand for part 2 courses. Are there any more plans to do any more? Not for this year at the moment, but next year is already booking up for 2026 part 2 dates. So even if you're just, you're working towards something, please do get in touch and let us know so that we get you on the list. We always keep a waiting list of people who are doing it. So Graham, I would heartily recommend you get in touch, even if it is for autumn 2026. Karen's looking at courses for doing expanding therapy business. Absolutely, you can do the diploma link courses. Sorry, going through. So Darren is saying considering setting up counselling business for concerned others, people affected by loved ones' addictions. I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea. And yes, the Human Givens approach would absolutely support that, because very much addiction is, can be caused by trauma, can be a result of trauma, needs not being met, that kind of thing. So it would work perfectly with that. Caroline is saying, would it complement her current role as a welfare officer? Absolutely, it would. Gareth, I don't know if you're able to talk a little bit about the breadth of people doing the training, the different careers.
Yeah, we've got people who are working in all kinds of roles when they come to us and who continue to. So we've got people working in welfare roles, in pastoral roles in schools. We've had people working in probation who found it incredibly useful. Um, yeah, people working in I mean, we also have, I would say we have an increasing number of people who are um, have worked in kind of other mental health roles or other social support roles like RMNs, midwives, GPs, who come and find it incredibly helpful in their role. Lots of GPs, actually, we usually have a GP chair at every part too, because they find it really helps their practice as a doctor. So yeah, it's really applicable in lots of ways and in lots of roles. And the role that I was in when I first trained in this, I was looking after the well-being of students in halls of residence. I wasn't intending to train as a therapist at all. It was there to augment my skills, and it absolutely did that. But I just got so interested that I kept going.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Trying to Sam is saying with the it's a direct message, but asking, do we give any sort of what's it called, prior learning? But we don't, unfortunately, take that into consideration, because a Human Givens approach is very much a whole holistic approach, that we can't accredit sort of prior learning in that way that another course might be able to. 2026 dates for part 1 will be released. Sorry about that. We're working on that program at the moment, and we hope to get those published in the next 6 weeks. So if you bear with us, we are on the case. And another one here about exams. We haven't spoken an awful lot about the assessments, actually, Gareth, have we? A little bit. But if you fail, can you retry? Yes, you can. There is an extra cost, which isn't onerous, but basically what happens is the last day of part 2 is when the exam is, and so anyone who doesn't quite get the full marks to pass is able to come back and retake the exam. Do you have to get a higher pass mark, don't they, Gareth? I think when they do that.
They do, yeah. But I mean, again, just to reassure people sometimes get attracted by the exam or quiz or test. We change the name sometimes because people have pattern matches to the word exam.
Yeah.
We will work with you to get you ready. And we do sometimes get students who are really doubting, and maybe it's been a long time since they've been out of education, or their previous experience of an exam wasn't good. That doesn't mean that your experience of this one is going to be like that, and we will really work with you to make sure that it's a good experience. And sometimes our students are quite surprised at how much they enjoy the exam in the end.
Yeah, it's a wonderful relief when it's done, that's for sure, isn't it, for them? I remember doing mine many years ago. I don't know, have you got a slide there, Gareth? What we haven't touched on is the sort of the
Yeah,
pricing
here we
aspect.
go.
Oh, didn't touch on the special offer either, actually, which is for everyone. So thank you for coming tonight and giving us your attention. We'd like to give you 10% off either Gareth's Therapeutic Power of Language, which, as we say, is a really good way to start your diploma journey, or any of the other diploma workshops if you've already done that, as I know some people have. You can use the same code, which is start-10. You can use that to book on any of the workshops, the part 1 workshops, and that offer is running until the 28th of May. So if you do want to join Gareth next week in London, he's doing therapeutic language and stories. It would be great to see you. I'm sure he'd love to meet you in person. But you're also going back in to Bristol in August, aren't you? In London again in the autumn. So there. Do you have a slide, Gareth, about the diploma journey slide with the fees on there? I can't remember if you wanted.
I don't think I do on this one.
Okie dokes, but the fees are there, and what I'm going to do after this event finishes is send through a diploma email to everybody. It's got all the links on there, and you've got the fees on there. There's a breakdown. We do run offers very often. At the moment, we've got offers on the online courses, the part 1 online courses. There's a bundle where you can get 20% off for those if you buy them all together. I think it's actually 22%, something like that. And if you know that you're going to do part 1 and you really want to do it, you can, if you book lots of the part 1 workshops all together, 5 or more, you can get 10% off those too if you've decided it's for you. But I would also really encourage everybody to, if we haven't answered all your questions, it's been a bit of a whistle stop here, do please contact us in the office. There's a lovely team here. We're always happy to chat and answer any questions that you've got here. So please do get in contact. Again, contact details will come through. I've got a couple more questions, if we can perhaps just quickly take those, Gareth. Sandra's saying she works in HR. Are you seeing an increase in HR professionals? We're definitely.
Yeah, I was just posting on it. Funnily enough, yeah, we are actually. Yeah, we have seen a run of people from HR coming through, which has been quite interesting because again, that brings into the classroom a whole other range of experience, which is really great because we're able to draw on all of that as well. You know, whatever experiences our students are bringing in from whether they've been in this kind of work before or it's completely new, it always brings, you know, richness and stuff that we can use. So, but absolutely, yes, we've definitely have people coming through from HR recently. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But Libby's saying here, will there be assignments, essays, journals to complete throughout 1, 2, and 3? There aren't assignments until you get to part 3, isn't it? Really,
Shall I just if I just talk about what that all looks like? So one of the things is we're training you to be therapists. So the ability to write an essay isn't the thing that we're interested in, and I think that's really important to say up front. It's something in education terms it's called constructive alignment. We make sure that our assessment is assessing the thing that we're training you to do. So the key assessments in part 3, as we say, are we assess you actually doing therapy sessions, and your supervisor will have seen you doing therapy and on a recording, or at least one recording, probably several. So that's the key assessment. And then we want the Viva that I talked about earlier on will assess your understanding of the organizing idea and the model. And then you'll use that bit of CPD that we talked about at the end, where you have to write up that CPD plan. That's to demonstrate your own reflective practice and you're able to reflect on your own strengths and weaknesses and plan for addressing those in the future. Before all of that, there's the exam on part 2. And during part 2, we also kind of assess, you know, your ability to kind of, you know, your own self-awareness, your own critical thinking and things like that as we're just going through the 2 weeks, just to make sure that you're in the right place with all of that. But there are no kind of formal essay type assessments because that's not what's important to the role. So sometimes people worry about that and think they're going to be asked to do, you know, long essays or things like that. That's not what we're going to be asking you to do. We're going to want to see that you can work with people in a safe, effective, ethically sound way. And that's where we put our focus in the assessment.
Absolutely. And it's worth saying about the exam that actually none of the answers we're looking for are they're not long written answers, are they? It's
a knowledge-based exam. We just need to know that you have the knowledge that you need to do the work with people and that you can recall it when you're under a bit of pressure, which is why we do it in an exam. Because obviously when you're working with a client, you can't go, hang on, there's a bit of something about this in the manual somewhere, let me go and look it up. You've got to know it and be able to pull it out of your head. So the exam just tests that and make sure that we know you've got the knowledge that you need before you start working with people in members of the public.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also worth saying that anybody who's got dyslexia or anything like that, we would give you extra time to do that exam. So it wouldn't worry about that. You can always ask the office again. We've got another quick question comes from Elaine, who I think is abroad, saying, as a taster course, is there an online course that you'd recommend as a good one? I don't know, Gareth, whether maybe the addictions or depression online courses, would they be a good place to start, or the effective counselling one?
Yeah, the effective counselling one might be a reasonable place to start. I mean, yeah, those ones are probably good ones to start with. They'll give you a good sense of the model and how we use it and how we approach things with it. And I think if you did, you know, if you can do 1 or 2 of those, that'll give you a good sense of the model and whether you think you can work with it, whether you like the training, and then, you know, you could think about, you know, whether it would be possible to come and do any of the in-person.
Yeah, I think Arlene's also put effective brief psychotherapy in there as well.
That's the link. Yeah,
we do.
That's the one I was thinking about. Yeah,
that's a good overview one. Thank you, Arlene, for sending that through. So I don't know if anybody's got, is there a fast tracker option? We've got the fast track blocks of training. I don't know what your first name is there. So you can work through, and again, it's very much is about the time that you've got available to devote to the training and the learning and practicing of the skills. So that very much denotes the time it can take to go through. But some people, if they've got existing skills in this area, they've done it in a year. We wouldn't always recommend that, but they've done the whole diploma in possibly not up to part 3 actually, because
part 1 and part 2. Yeah.
Between part 2 and part 3, you've got to do clinical sort of practice work with clients and your supervisor. So that again really varies depending on your own previous experience and aptitude. So there's another one coming through. Somebody's not Darren has enrolled yet, but working through hasn't enrolled yet. Is there a cutoff before you can? There isn't a cutoff, Darren, but we do really recommend you get in contact with Fiona. That's she's on admin@humangivens.com to let her know that you are working through the diploma. It's a bit hard for us. We've got lots of people coming on the courses, so unless you sort of give us a shout out and say that you're actually physically doing the diploma, we don't always know, and we do get the part 2s get very filled up, so we like to have a waiting list and have an idea of how many people are working towards that date so that you're not disappointed, basically. In part 2, does Human Givens help you find a company to work with to get counselling experience? You give advice, don't you? And I know supervisors also.
We do, and we'll guide you to where you can do that. We do have 1 or 2 some places around the country which will take human HG therapists on placement, but because we're sprawled all over the UK, we're not in one location. It's really hard for us to set that up for everyone. So we will guide you to have it going to find that in your local area and look at some other options for you as well in that local area, because it really depends on where you are and things like that. So it depends so much personal circumstances, but we do talk about it in on part 2. We've got a specific bit of part 2 where we talk about your next steps and how you can find clients and how you can find places to work.
Great. Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm looking at the time. We have overrun slightly. I don't know if there's any pressing last questions or whether we should call it a day. And great, Samora. Thank you. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for coming and joining us. And like I say, do get in contact with the team at the office or come along on one of the training days, meet Gareth or Joe, who couldn't be here tonight, and our other tutors who are all highly experienced working in the field. We'd all love to see you, and that's the main thing really, is get in touch. And don't forget the offer, the 10% off, which ends on the 28th of May. So do recommend you take advantage of that. And probably all it's left to say is, Gareth, thank you very, very much for that hugely whistle-top tour. You crammed an awful lot in a short space of time. So I really appreciate that. And Arlene, thank you very much for being behind the scene. Thank you very much, and do get in touch. We hope to see you all soon. Thanks.
Good evening. Bye.
Bye.